I froze, hiding just outside the patio door. That's when I heard my mother Clara's voice. So proud. My sister's kids eat first. They're the priority. My sister, Isabel, laughed. It's fine, Mom. Maya's boys can wait. They're used to it. They can share the crumbs and leftovers. My own family, ranking my children. They had no idea I was standing right there. They had no idea that by relegating my sons to the leftovers, they had just forfeited their entire financial future. The scent hit me before I even shut the car door. A thick, smoky cloud of charcoal and roasting meat that, on any other day, would have felt like comfort. Sunday BBQs at my parents' house were a ritual, a command performance. I balanced the heavy glass bowl of pasta salad I'd spent an hour making, the one nobody asked for but everyone would expect, and corralled my two boys, Liam and Noah, toward the backyard. Leo, my husband, was stuck on a conference call with a client. A small mercy. He'd be here later. But for now, I was running interference alone. When I walked through the side gate and onto the backyard patio, I froze. It wasn't a dramatic stop, just a cessation of movement. My sneakers sticking to the sun-warmed concrete. The scene was picture perfect, in a way that always excluded me. My sister, Isabel, was holding court at the main patio table, laughing at something my father, Marcus, said from his position at the grill. Her kids, Sophie and Ethan, already had plates piled high with burgers and sausages, their faces bright and triumphant. My mother's voice drifted from the center of the chaos, calm, almost proud. Clara, a woman who lived in a state of carefully curated crisis, was directing the flow of food. Now, let's make sure Sophie and Ethan have had their fill, she announced, her voice pitching just loud enough to carry. Isabel's kids eat first. They're growing boys and girls. My sister, Isabel, let out a light laugh, the sound tinkling over the patio like wind chimes. They're absolute monsters today, Mom. My father didn't even look up from the grill, just grunted his agreement. Let them eat. And that's when my mother added the line that would fracture everything. It's only practical. Maya's boys can wait. They can have the leftovers from the main grill. It's fine. Leftovers. Not even crumbs. Leftovers. My gaze snapped to the corner of the patio. By the old, slightly cracked patio steps that led down to the unkempt part of the lawn. And there they were. My children. Liam, my eldest, and Noah, my baby, sat with empty paper plates balanced on their knees, trying to act like they weren't hungry, like they weren't watching their cousins devour the best parts of the meal. Liam was tracing the rim of his plate with a finger, his shoulders hunched. Noah was just staring, his eyes fixed on the grill. My chest tightened, a familiar, acidic burn. But this time, something else followed. Inside, everything went utterly still. The buzzing in my ears stopped. The smell of the smoke vanished. There was only a cold, sharp clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't march over to the grill and demand food for my sons. I didn't point out that I had paid for the very propane tank my father was using, that my last loan to them had covered the cost of the premium cut meat Sophie was now picking at. I simply walked over to my sons, the heavy pasta salad still in my arms. I set it down on the grass. A forgotten offering. I placed one hand on Liam's shoulder and one on Noah's. Get your shoes, boys, I said, my voice unnervingly even. We're going home. Liam looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and, beneath it, a heartbreaking flicker of relief. I didn't look back. I didn't explain. I simply took my boys by the hand and walked out the gate. What they didn't know, what none of them sensed as they redistributed the food on their plates, was that the moment they pushed my children onto those steps, the moment they designated them as worthy only of leftovers, they pushed themselves somewhere far worse. They pushed themselves out of my life. Yes, I am Maya. And I was, in that instant, completely and finally done. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Obligation. If I'm being honest, the scene on my parents' backyard patio didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time their hierarchy became so undeniable, so loud that even my practiced silence couldn't protect me from it. The truth is, the pattern began years before my boys, Liam and Noah, were even born. It was an architecture of obligation, and I was its primary load-bearing wall. It started when I was 17, still working my first part-time job on weekends at the local bookstore. The smell of paper and old dust was my refuge, but my paychecks, deposited into my first-ever bank account, were not my own. My mother, Clara, a woman who always sounded one step away from a personal crisis, found them first. "Oh, Maya," she'd sighed one afternoon, clutching a utility bill. "I just don't know how we're going to manage the gas bill this month. If you could just help a little." What they didn't know, what none of them sensed as they redistributed the food on their plates, was that the moment they pushed my children onto those steps, the moment they designated them as worthy only of leftovers, they pushed themselves somewhere far worse. They pushed themselves out of my life. Yes, I am Maya. And I was, in that instant, completely and finally done. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Obligation. If I'm being honest, the scene on my parents' backyard patio didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time their hierarchy became so undeniable, so loud that even my practiced silence couldn't protect me from it. The truth is, the pattern began years before my boys, Liam and Noah, were even born. It was an architecture of obligation, and I was its primary load-bearing wall. It started when I was 17, still working my first part-time job on weekends at the local bookstore. The smell of paper and old dust was my refuge. But my paychecks, deposited into my first-ever bank account, were not my own. My mother, Clara, a woman who always sounded one step away from a personal crisis, found them first. "Oh, Maya," she'd sighed one afternoon, clutching a utility bill. "I just don't know how we're going to manage the gas bill this month. If you could just help a little." My father, Marcus, practical to the point of coldness, nodded from behind his newspaper. "It would teach you responsibility," he said, his voice flat. "It's good for you to contribute." So I contributed. $20 there, 50 here. And before I understood what was happening, giving became a reflex, a habit, then an obligation. The praise I received for being so mature, so different from other girls, was the anesthesia that kept me from feeling the incision. By the time I was in college, studying for a marketing degree I hoped would be my escape, the requests became more structured. They were sending me pictures of repair bills, little notes from contractors, and when I'd call worried to ask if everything was okay, my mother's voice always quivered in just the right places. "We're trying, sweetheart, we're really trying, but your father's back." I didn't see it then, but looking back, it was choreography, performed with a worry that was perfectly, painfully timed. When I graduated and landed my first full-time job as a senior marketing manager, the requests changed tone. They weren't, "Could you help?" anymore. They became, "We really need you." Dental work for Marcus, a new, top-of-the-line refrigerator when theirs just died. A major car issue. It always arrived as an emergency urgent, unavoidable, and somehow always aligned with the weeks my quarterly bonus was deposited. They knew my pay schedule better than I did. And then came Isabel, my older sibling. She was the one my parents bragged about, the one who had flair, the one whose kids, Sophie and Ethan, were always invited, always praised, always framed as the normal ones. They were the standard, and my future, apparently, was the deviation. When Isabel's car broke down, I helped with repairs. When she needed a boost with her insurance, I covered that, too. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself, family helps family, right? But the flow of help was a one-way street, running from my bank account directly into their comfort. The imbalance was a dull ache I'd learned to ignore, a a stone in my shoe I just hadn't bothered to remove. That day, on the patio, the stone finally cut through the skin. The imbalance didn't just appear, it sharpened. When I got married to Leo, my husband, the entire dynamic shifted. Leo was an architect, a patient, steady man who saw the world in terms of structure, balance, and integrity. He was everything my chaotic, emotionally manipulative family was not. He was calm, observant, and he saw, far more clearly than I ever did, the faulty architecture of my obligation. In the beginning, he was simply baffled. He'd watch me field panicked calls from my mother, Clara, about a leaky pipe, only to have me transfer several $100s without a second thought. He'd see me buy groceries for my parents' house, filling their pantry with the expensive brands they preferred, while I was simultaneously pinching pennies for our own down payment. He'd ask, his voice never accusing, only questioning, "Maya, do they ever offer to help us? Do they even ask about your projects at work? Or just your paycheck?" I'd laugh it off, a brittle, practiced sound. "They're busy, Leo. It's just how they are. Family helps family." But Leo, being a man who designs foundations, knew a one-sided load-bearing wall when he saw one. "That's not balance, Maya," he'd say softly. "That's just stress. Eventually, something's going to crack." Every time a holiday came around, every time there was something to celebrate, I noticed the seating arrangements, the invitations, the small, deliberate moments of distance. At Thanksgiving, Marcus would talk business to Isabel's husband, a dentist he respected, asking his opinion on investments. He would only ask Leo, the architect whose work won regional awards, still drawing those blueprints? The dismissal was subtle but constant. Leo would gently step back during these family conversations, a polite observer, as if he already understood he wasn't included in their script. And then came the kids. When Liam was born, my mother Clara held him like he was fragile glass, not precious, but delicate, uncertain, as if she didn't quite know where he fit in the family portrait she'd already painted. "He's quiet, isn't he?" she said, her smile not reaching her eyes, before quickly handing him back to me to go fawn over a photo Isabel had texted of Sophie at ballet. When Noah arrived 2 years later, my father Marcus congratulated us, but his eyes flickered with that same hesitation, that quick, cold calculation. "2 boys," he said, nodding slowly. "You'll have your hands full." It wasn't a blessing, it was a cost analysis. I told myself I imagined it. I blamed exhaustion, the stress of my high-pressure role as a senior marketing manager, anything but the prejudice that was right in front of me. But children feel things adults learn to ignore. Liam, my thoughtful, quiet boy, learned early that his cousins, Sophie and Ethan, got the first turn, the best toys, the biggest slices of cake. He learned to shrink himself, to make his wants small, to simply step aside before he was even asked. Noah, my energetic, bright-eyed boy, picked up on the seating patterns. He instinctively knew that Sophie and Ethan always sat near the adults, their drawings praised and taped to the refrigerator, while he and Liam were directed to go play in the other room, away from the adult conversation. And every time I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, watching Liam silently hand over a new toy truck to Ethan, I convinced myself I was being oversensitive. I was the problem. The requests for money never stopped. They only grew. Mortgage help, medical bills, a sudden emergency roof repair that, months later, looked suspiciously like the brand-new stone patio they were all sitting on. A mysterious, unexpected expense that always popped up right before Christmas, draining the funds I'd set aside for my own children. And every time I said yes, believing that my generosity would eventually bridge the emotional divide, I thought I was buying peace. I believed, stupidly, that one day they would see my loyalty and finally, see my sons as equals. But it never did. Generosity wasn't a bridge. It was fuel. It powered the very engine of their disdain. The moment I walked onto that patio, the moment I saw my boys on those steps with empty paper plates, it wasn't just a shock. It was recognition. A horrible, sinking recognition. Nothing had changed. I had been funding a hierarchy that pushed my children to the edges. I had been financing a family who saw my boys as suitable only for leftovers, not kin. And standing there, watching Sophie and Ethan eat their fill while my children stared at nothing, I finally understood. This wasn't a slip-up. This wasn't an oversight. This was the system. One I had helped build. One I had paid for, without ever seeing it clearly. And once that realization settled in my bones, something else rose with it. Something still, sharp, and absolute. I wasn't going to let them overlook my sons ever again. Chapter 4. The Fault Line. I didn't even make it home. I drove for 10 minutes. Liam and Noah silent in the back seat. Their stillness a heavy, suffocating blanket over the car. I saw Liam's reflection in the rearview mirror, his eyes fixed on the window, his face pale and unreadable. And the guilt hit me. The decades of trained obligation, the deeply ingrained fear of confrontation. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe Mom was just flustered. It's a barbecue. I'm making a scene. I'm ruining the day for everyone. I was punishing my kids by taking them away from their family. It was twisted, but the thought was there. I hated myself for it. But I pulled a U-turn on the quiet suburban street. We're going back, I said, my voice strained, hollow. I forgot the pasta salad bowl. It was a lie. I hadn't forgotten it. I just needed an excuse to reverse my one act of rebellion. To put everything back in the box and pretend the hierarchy didn't exist. By the time I returned to my parents' house, just 20 minutes after I'd stormed out, I thought the worst had already happened. I thought the humiliation of watching my boys sit on those steps with empty plates was the breaking point. I didn't realize the real trigger was still waiting for me, sitting quietly beneath the surface like a fault line, ready to split the world in two. I parked on the street. "Stay here for 1 second, guys," I said. But they unbuckled immediately. They were quiet, but they followed me, like little shadows. They were scared to be left in the car, and terrified to go back in. They hovered by the side gate, just out of sight, 2 small figures clinging to each other. I pushed the gate open, which was still slightly ajar from my hasty exit. When I stepped back onto the patio, the scene was almost identical. The air, however, was too calm. The kind of calm that isn't peaceful, just empty of conflict. I stepped toward the sliding glass door to the dining room, where they had moved to get dessert, and that's when I heard it again. My mother, Clara, the woman who raised me on phrases like, "family first," was speaking with the same tone she used when justifying anything she didn't want to question. That reasonable, practical tone. "My sister's kids eat first," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the screen. "And Maya's boys can wait for the leftovers. It's only practical. You saw how fast Sophie and Ethan ate. My sibling, Isabel, the one who'd always assumed her children belonged at the center of every family moment, gave that small, tinkling laugh, the one I used to think was so sophisticated. "It's better they get used to it now," she added, her voice laced with a casual, horrifying cruelty. "They were born to live off what's left anyway. It's just their station." And then my father, Marcus. Steady, logical, never emotional. He closed the circle, his voice a flat, final judgment. "They need to learn their place," he said, the sound of a coffee cup clicking onto a saucer punctuating his sentence. "That's just how things are." I moved before they even realized I was standing just beyond the sliding door. A ghost in my own family home. In the dining room's warm light, I could see everything clearly. Sophie and Ethan, finishing their second servings of ice cream, sitting comfortably at the main table, laughing. And just behind me, in the shadow of the patio doorway, hovered Liam and Noah, my boys. They had heard it all, waiting for permission to exist. Liam met my eyes for half a second, and in that look, I felt something inside me fracture and reset, like a poorly set bone being snapped back into place. He wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't just hurt. He understood. He understood exactly where the adults in this house, his grandparents, his aunt had placed him. That was the moment. Not the leftovers. Not the empty plates. Not the casual cruelty from my mother. It was the look on my child's face. The quiet shrinking. The practiced, horrifying acceptance of less that rewired something fundamental in me. I knew then that nothing I said inside that house would matter. Words wouldn't fix this. Confrontation wouldn't change them. My money hadn't bought their love. It had only bought their contempt. But systems can be dismantled. Support can be withdrawn. And I, after years of paying for this family's comfort, for the very mortgage on this house, held the one lever they never, ever expected me to pull. The real trigger wasn't their cruelty. It was my decision, in that instant, to stop funding it. I didn't slam the door when I left my parents' house for the second and final time that night. I didn't raise my voice or make the scene they were so clearly braced for. I simply placed a hand on each of my boys' backs, a silent, firm pressure, and guided them toward the car. They climbed in without a word, their small bodies moving with a weariness that didn't belong to children. Liam automatically reached for his seatbelt. His gaze fixed on his own knees. Noah just leaned his head against the cool glass of the window. I buckled them in. The silence between us felt thick, heavy enough to push against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady for their sake. Children read everything through the smallest cracks in a parent's face, in the tension of their shoulders. I would not show them the rage I felt. I would show them resolve. When I pulled into our driveway, the headlights sweeping across our own neat, modest front door, Leo opened it before I even touched my keys. He was an architect. He noticed when a single line was out of place, when a structure was under stress. He had been standing at the window, watching for us, sensing the profound shift in equilibrium. One look at me, one look at the boys as they shuffled past him into the entryway, and he knew the facade had finally, irrevocably, cracked. He didn't ask, what happened? Like most people would. He didn't demand answers or stoke the fire. He just said gently, his voice a low anchor, let's get them settled first. He understood that our first priority was reinforcing our foundation. He helped Liam find his box of building blocks, and within minutes, Liam was on the living room floor, meticulously building a tall, structurally sound tower, his own small act of control. Leo guided Noah toward the living room couch, wrapped him in his favorite blanket, and put on the favorite animated show Noah loved, the one with the bright colors and simple, kind stories. Only when they were busy, absorbed in their small, safe worlds, did Leo return to the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, and waited for me to speak. I didn't know where to start. So I started with the words that hurt the most, the ones I couldn't unhear. My mother said, "Isabel's kids eat first." I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "And my kids, my boys, should wait for the leftovers." The muscle in Leo's jaw shifted, a single, tight flicker, but he stayed still. And Isabel laughed. I continued, the memory of that tinkling sound making me nauseous. She said, "They were born to live off what's left. It's just their station." And my father backed them up. He said they need to learn their place. They weren't joking, Leo, they meant every word. I expected anger from him. Outrage. A demand for action, but instead, Leo breathed out slowly, a long, heavy sigh, like a man who had been staring at a structural integrity report, finally seeing the data that confirmed the foundation was rotten. He had always known this moment would arrive. "Sit," he said softly. I sat at our small kitchen table, the one we had bought, in our house. "Maya," he began, his voice quiet but intense. "You've been supporting that entire household for years. You've been the only thing holding that faulty structure together. The bills, the mortgage, the repairs, the cars, all of it." He knelt in front of me, taking my hands. And you've never once asked what any of that has cost you. Not in money, but in dignity. I wanted to defend them. The reflex was so strong, so deeply ingrained after decades of practice. But they're my family. But Mom is just anxious. But nothing came out, because the truth had already been sitting in the back of my throat since the moment Liam looked at me with those sad, understanding eyes. They don't see our sons as family, Maya, Leo said, his voice flat with certainty. They see them as a complication. And they see you as a resource. A utility they can drain without ever having to be grateful. They built their entire lives on the assumption that you would never, ever check the balance. I didn't argue. I couldn't. That silence, the one that settled between us, wasn't defeat. It was clarity. It was the cold, clean air after a devastating storm. He held my gaze. So? He asked quietly, the architect ready to draw a new blueprint. What do you want to do? Chapter 6. The Blueprint of Disentanglement. And just like that, the quiet, methodical plan began. I stood up, walked to our home office, and pulled out my laptop. I opened a spreadsheet, one I'd started years ago but had been too afraid to look at too closely. Titled simply, Family Support. Leo walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a new, black moleskin notebook and a sharp pen, the kind he used for drafting. He'd bought the pad months ago, planning to use it for work notes. It had remained blank, pristine, until that night. Let's make a blueprint, he said. He sat beside me, and I opened the banking app I had avoided looking at too closely. I scrolled. Page after page after page of transfers. 8 solid years. Payments tagged with messages that now seemed so sinister. Just until we're caught up. Family helps family. Roof, emergency, that became the patio. Isabel's car. We're short this month, it's just temporary. Leo drew 4 columns in the moleskin. Mortgage, auto, utilities, emergencies. Under each category, I called out numbers, dates, and amounts, my voice flat, like a senior marketing manager reading grim quarterly projections. The spreadsheet filled, the formulas automatically tallying the cost. The pad filled faster than I expected. When I hit sum on the final column, a number flashed on the screen, a number so large it made me feel faint. The price of my own children's humiliation. 8 years of structured support, I whispered, staring at the total. It's almost scheduled. They planned their budgets around me. They've built their lives around your income, Leo replied, his voice cold. And they've built their arrogance on it too. They didn't just take your money, Maya. They took your silence as agreement. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because something colder and more precise had settled into my chest. A kind of quiet steadiness I'd never felt before. The focused calm of a manager about to liquidate a failed asset. I'm done, I said. Leo nodded, his pen poised. Then let's make the list. The blueprint for disentanglement. First, call the mortgage company. I was a co-borrower on their house. I asked what my options were. When the agent explained the process for co-borrower release, the refinancing qualification requirements, the potential forced sell-off if Marcus and Clara couldn't meet the numbers on their own meager income, I wrote every detail down. Second, call the auto lender for Isabel's car. I instructed them to require my explicit written authorization for any credit adjustments or refinancing tied to my previous co-signature. I put a formal freeze on my credit being used as leverage. Third, the utilities and payments. The premium cable, the high-speed internet, the gas bill I'd set up during one of their emergencies and had been paying ever since. I logged into each account. I canceled every single automatic transfer. Fourth, the savings transfer. The cushion I'd created years ago. A monthly automatic transfer into my parents' savings account. Deleted. Permanently. Fifth, my financial advisor. I sent an email. Time-stamped 1:32 a.m. Subject: Full audit. I need a full audit of all personal support and non-household transfers given to my extended family over the past 8 years. Sixth, A family lawyer. Not for lawsuits. Just for clarity. For boundaries. For documentation. Every step was done quietly. No grand announcement. No confrontation. Just removal. Just the administrative, systematic ending of access. Around 2 a.m. After the last account was adjusted and the last email sent, I closed my laptop and set my pen down. The house was silent. Even the refrigerator hum felt distant. Leo placed a mug of warm tea beside me, not as comfort, but as an anchor. "Do you feel better?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, looking at the finished list in the moleskin notebook. "I feel awake." There was no satisfaction. Not yet. Just a cold, hard realization. My silence that night, walking out without a word, refusing to plead or argue, had been the first act of power I'd taken in years. And the blueprint I drafted on that notebook that was power solidified. Every unchecked box on my family's budget, every deposit they expected, every bill waiting for my name, all of it would hit them like a winter storm they never, ever prepared for. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed protection. For my sons, for my home, for the part of me that finally remembered what I was worth. They had taught my children to expect less. Now they would learn what happens when I stopped giving more. The first sign that my administrative silence had reached them, that the blueprint for disentanglement had become their reality, came exactly 48 hours later. It was a Tuesday morning. The quiet calm of our house was a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing. I was in my kitchen, pouring cereal for Liam and Noah, the morning sun landing on the counter. It felt normal, domestic, safe. Then my phone lit up with my father's name, Marcus. The man who rarely called unless a payment was late or a new problem had surfaced. His calls were transactional, never personal. I let it ring twice, took a breath, and answered, putting it on speaker. "Maya," he said without greeting. His voice was tight, annoyed, as if I were a subordinate who had missed a deadline. "There seems to be some kind of flag on the mortgage account. The transfer didn't go through. You need to call the bank and sort it out." I didn't bother sitting down. I watched Liam carefully spoon cereal into his mouth, his focus absolute. "There's no issue, Marcus," I replied, my voice as calm and clear as the morning light. I canceled it. The pause on the other end was sharp, a sudden void of sound, the kind of silence that cuts through a person's certainty. "You canceled it," he repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of disbelief. "Without warning?" "I warned you," I said quietly, thinking of my sons on those patio steps. "You just weren't listening. You were too busy explaining my children's place in the world." He inhaled, a sharp, angry sound, like he was steadying himself to lecture me. "Maya, this is your parents' home. This is your family. We rely on that. You can't just—" "I know exactly what you rely on," I cut in, my voice losing its warmth, turning into the voice I used as a senior marketing manager facing a vendor who had broken contract. That's why it stopped. Before he could respond, before he could shift from confusion into rage, another call buzzed in. My sibling, Isabel, the one who had laughed while my son sat hungry, relegated to the sidelines. She was already spiraling. I clicked over, ending the call with Marcus without a goodbye. "Maya, what the hell did you do?" she demanded, her voice high and frantic. There was no greeting. My car payment was rejected. I tried to renegotiate the financing, and they said the cosigner blocked all adjustments and my credit is frozen. I can't afford a hit on my credit right now, you know that. What did you do? I leaned against the counter, watching the morning sun land on Noah's cereal bowl. He was humming, oblivious and happy. "You'll have to manage, Isabel," I said, my voice utterly flat. "The way you expect my sons to manage with whatever scraps are left over. That was a misunderstanding," she stammered, the panic making her words clumsy. "You took that completely the wrong way. You said," I reminded her, my voice cold and precise, "that my boys were born to live off what's left, That it was their station. Those were your words, Isabel. Now you get to learn what that feels like. Silence. Not guilt. Just the sound of someone frantically recalculating their losses. I hung up the phone. Before I could even set it down, it lit up again. My mother, Clara, the architect of emotional leverage, and she was using the nuclear option, FaceTime. I let it ring twice, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Then I answered. Her face appeared, tight with a panic that was bone-deep and genuine. Maya, sweetheart, she began, her voice shaking, tears already welling in her eyes. Your father and I, we need to talk to you. The bills. Things are piling up faster than we ever expected. The mortgage. Isabel's car. We're in a difficult situation. Are you? I said calmly. You know we depend on that support, she cried, the tears now spilling over. It isn't fair to punish us like this. After everything we've done for you, punish. The word hung there, vibrating with toxic irony. You punished my sons, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You punished them right in front of me, on your brand new patio. You punished them for not being Sophie and Ethan. You punished them for being mine. That was different, she insisted, her voice rising. We were being practical. We were being realistic about how the world works. It's not our fault you're so sensitive. No, Mom, I said, and I finally understood. You weren't being realistic. You were being realistic about how much you thought you could get away with, because you assumed I'd always pay. You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed I would value your comfort over my children's dignity. You were wrong. Her expression cracked. First confusion, then fear, then a dawning unfiltered horror. Maya, please, she whispered, the manipulation draining away, leaving only the raw fear. We could lose the house. We have nothing saved. And my children, I said softly, could have lost their sense of worth if I had stayed silent. She flinched, as if I had slapped her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't bargain. I simply laid out the truth, the administrative facts, in the same steady tone they'd used while ranking grandchildren. The mortgage help won't return. The automatic transfers are gone. The cushion fund is gone. The co-signing access is locked. From now on, you live on your income, like every other adult. Maya, she whispered, her face collapsing. You can't do this to us. We're your family. I'm not doing anything to you, I replied, my gaze unwavering. I'm stopping what you were doing to my children. Another silence, this one raw, unshielded. For the first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix the fallout. They were. And somewhere in the background of their panic I could hear Marcus's voice rising, urgent shuffling, footsteps pacing across hardwood. I heard the beginning of something they never thought they'd feel. Desperation. The same desperation my sons felt sitting on those steps with empty plates. Only this time, the emptiness wasn't on my children's laps. It was in my parents' bank accounts. In their plans. In the security they believed I owed them. Their hierarchy collapsed exactly where it was built, on the foundation of my silence. And now that silence was gone. Chapter 8. The New Equilibrium. In the weeks that followed, the fallout settled into place with a quietness that felt almost surreal. There were no dramatic confrontations at my door, no midnight arrivals filled with tears and accusations, no scenes worthy of a family intervention. My blueprint had been administrative, and so was the result. Instead, everything unfolded the way truth usually does. Slow, steady, and impossible to outrun. My financial advisor confirmed the total amount I had given over 8 years. The number was staggering, enough to have funded both my sons' college educations. Seeing it in a formal report solidified my resolve, moving it from an emotional reaction to an undeniable financial fact. The lawyer drafted cease and desist letters regarding financial contact, which, thankfully, were never needed. The panic, it seemed, had frozen them. We heard through the grapevine a distant cousin who called, confused, that my parents, Clara and Marcus, who once lived in a house too large for their real needs, a house I had been paying for, had been forced to sell. They moved into a modest rental apartment on the other side of town, far from the neighborhood they prized so highly. My sibling, Isabel, who used to speak casually about comfort levels and normal-looking families, had to trade in her leased SUV. She was forced to pick up extra shifts at the dental practice she worked at, covering the payments on a used car she'd had to finance entirely on her own. The station she had assigned my children was one she was now experiencing herself. But in my own home, the air felt lighter, cleaner. Jalin, my thoughtful, observant boy, started taking the main seat at our dinner table, the one at the head of the table, the one he used to avoid because that's where guests sit. He'd spread his homework out there, claiming the space, his shoulders straight. Theo, always energetic but previously hesitant, began talking more. He told long, meandering stories about his day, asking questions, and laughing louder than he ever had at my parents' house. He no longer checked the adults' faces to see if he was allowed to take seconds or if his joy was too loud. One evening, about 2 months after the BBQ, I was washing dishes after dinner. I watched them through the kitchen doorway, playing on the living room floor, Liam patiently showing Noah how to make his block tower stronger. They weren't waiting for permission. They weren't checking for approval. They simply existed, comfortable, visible, whole. Leo stood beside me, drying the plates, his presence a quiet support. "You seem quieter," he said. Not in an accusatory way, but as an observation. I thought about it, watching the soap bubbles iridescent in the sink. The old silence had been a heavy, suffocating thing. A silence of unsaid things, of swallowed anger. This was different. "I'm not quiet," I answered, meeting his eyes. "I'm settled." He nodded, understanding without needing any more explanation. The quiet wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space for my children to grow into. To know that their worth wasn't measured by someone else's hierarchy or their proximity to the grill. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. Even as I signed the last document severing my name from their mortgage, I just felt aligned. Aligned with myself, with my boys, with the boundaries I should have drawn years ago. What they lost was comfort. A comfort they hadn't even earned. What I gained was clarity, and for the first time in a long, long time, that balance finally felt right. In the end, it wasn't the money I took back that changed everything. It was the space I reclaimed. The day my parents taught my sons they were meant for leftovers was the day I stopped feeding a system that starved them. Some boundaries break families. Mine simply revealed the truth of what my family had always been. My boys don't sit on the steps anymore, and I will never, ever apologize for choosing their worth over anyone's comfort. Not even my own parents. It's been almost a year. The backyard BBQ incident, as Leo and I now call it, feels both like a lifetime ago and like it happened yesterday. The sharp, acidic sting of that afternoon has faded, replaced by something solid and calm. The house is quiet tonight. Leo is in his home office, sketching designs for a new community center. The soft scratch of his pen, the only sound. Liam and Noah are asleep. They're breathing deep and even, their doors left open just to crack a sign of the security they feel. I'm sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where Leo and I drafted the blueprint of our disentanglement. The black moleskin notebook is still in the office drawer, but I don't need to look at it anymore. The change isn't in the notebook. It's in the air we breathe. For the first few months, I braced for impact. I expected desperate, tearful visits. I anticipated angry letters, attempts to reach me through flying monkeys or distant relatives, but there was nothing. The silence from their side was as absolute as my decision had been. The financial umbilical cord I had severed was, it turned out, the only cord that truly connected us. Without its flow, the relationship simply withered. They didn't fight for me, or for their grandsons. They fought for the mortgage payment. When that fight was lost, they vanished. The real change, the one that matters, has been in my sons. It happened slowly, then all at once. Liam, my thoughtful, introspective boy who had learned to shrink himself, has found his voice. At a recent parent-teacher conference, his teacher remarked, "Liam has really come out of his shell this year. He's the first to raise his hand, and he's become a real advocate for other kids in the class." Last week, at a birthday party, I watched as another child tried to take a toy from Noah. Liam didn't look at me. He didn't hesitate. He stepped right between them, placed a firm hand on the toy, and said, "No." He was playing with that first. He claimed the space, not just for himself, but for his brother. He has unlearned the lesson of the patio steps. And Noah, my bright, energetic boy, is simply louder. He laughs from his belly. He tells wild, imaginative stories at the dinner table, demanding our full attention. He asks for the biggest piece of chicken, for the last cookie, for more time to play, all with the brilliant, uncomplicated assumption that his wants are valid. He doesn't scan the adults' faces for permission to exist. He knows he belongs. We had our own Thanksgiving this year, just the four of us. I roasted a chicken, and Leo made mashed potatoes. As I set the food on the table, I watched my boys. They didn't wait. They didn't hover. They grabbed their plates and served themselves, their small hands reaching for drumsticks and wings, their voices overlapping as they argued about who got more. It was loud. It was messy. It was perfect. It was the antithesis of leftovers. I look at the spreadsheet sometimes. The tab formerly labeled Family Support has been renamed College Fund. The vast sum of money that I once poured into the sinking foundation of my parents' house is now building a future for my sons. It's a tangible inheritance, a direct transfer of resources from a place of obligation to a place of love. We're not just financially healthier, we are structurally sound. Leo, my calm, observant architect, sees it too. He stood with me in the kitchen last night, wrapping his arms around me as I looked out at our own small, quiet backyard. "You know," he said softly, "the strongest structures aren't the ones that are the most rigid. They're the ones that are designed to transfer load. You took an impossible load off this family, Maya. You saved us. I've mourned. I've mourned the mother and father I wished I had. I've mourned the sister I thought I could be close to. But that grief is clean. It's the grief for a fantasy, not a reality. The reality was a hierarchy that designated my children as less. The reality was a system I was funding, a system that was slowly poisoning my own home. My parents taught my children to learn their place. And I, in turn, taught my parents theirs. If this story, my story, resonates with you, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and share your own boundary-setting moment below. Your voice, your story of choosing your own worth, might be the spark someone else needs to finally leave the cold steps and claim their rightful seat at the table.